PastNowRead presents another entry in our anthology of stories that need to be told. Dead Drift. Enjoy. Dead Drift. Prologue. A morning on the Gulf Coast, quiet except for gulls and tide. I'm launching my sailboat from a public slip near a narrow cove I visit when I want to be alone. The air smells of brine and sun-split rope. While untying my stern line, I spot a woman in rubber boots crabbing in the shallows with 2 kids. The girls shriek at the sight of a blue crab makes them all laugh. The woman looks up, eyes meet mine, and something unspoken sparks. I don't know her yet, but I'll remember this moment until my last breath. Chapter 1. Trace. Route. The wind caught the sail just right that morning, easy and light, barely enough to fight the weight of silence I carried with me. Launching from the public slip near the cove had become routine. Check the hull, tie off the bow line, throttle out slow. I came for quiet, for space. The kind of space you can only get when there's salt in your lungs and the rest of the world drops off your stern. Then I saw her again, same woman from the day before, crabbing near the seawall, sleeves rolled, boots half submerged. 2 kids darted around her like minnows, laughing every time the net hit water. She wasn't just passing time, she belonged to the place, like the tide understood her rhythm. Her name, I'd find out later, was Callie. I didn't mean to stare, but she looked up. Not the kind of glance people give strangers, not a flinch either, just held me for a second, like she was trying to decide if I was part of her day or just background noise. I let the moment pass and finished tying down, kept my head low, but my hands were slower than usual. By mid-afternoon, the sun felt like a lie, bright but cold. I motored back in, tie off again, and there she was, rinsing off a crab bucket at the fish cleaning station. The kids were eating popsicles on the dock. She gave me a nod, like we were neighbors or allies. I walked over. "Good haul?" I asked. She looked at me sideways. "Couple blues, enough to make my kids argue over who gets the claws." "You teach them to crab?" "Teach?" She laughed. "No, they teach me. I just make sure they don't fall in." "Seems fair." She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. She had that calm edge you only see in people who've survived enough to stop performing. "Name's Callie," she finally offered, drying her hands. I lied and said, "Michael." I wasn't ready for her to know the real one, the one that used to sign off on lines of code that moved more money in a second than most people saw in a lifetime. We sat on the dock for a while after that, talking like people who weren't supposed to meet but had somehow agreed to make the most of it. Her voice had that tone of someone who'd been hurt, but still believed in people. Maybe not all people, but some. The kind worth betting on. I didn't tell her about my old life, about Obsidian Grid, about the AI I'd helped design to track emotional shifts through consumer behavior, about the offshore fund routing models I built that now quietly supported regimes I wanted nothing to do with. I didn't say why I left. She didn't ask. Maybe that's why I couldn't stop thinking about her. That night, I sat on the deck of the boat, rocking gently in the water, eating cold chicken and staring at the dark. I pulled out an old ThinkPad I kept hidden behind the bulkhead. It was patched, hardened, air-gapped. Still held fragments of the past, fragments I didn't want to lose but couldn't trust the cloud with. Out of habit more than reason, I ran a passive scan on the local network. That's when I saw it. A signal, an encrypted protocol bouncing off a tower nearby. Dead frequency, one I hadn't seen in years. It belonged to a backend once used by sentient finance systems, a joint project between private contractors and deep federal intel. I'd buried that code with my exit. Yet here it was, whispering through the ether. I cross-referenced the IP string. It came from a house 2 blocks from the dock, Callie's house. I froze. For a moment, the salt in my throat went dry. Coincidence? Impossible. That protocol was custom, stitched from a logic gate I'd authored under a secure comp ID. Only 4 people in the world had access to it. One of them was presumed dead. Her ex, she'd mentioned him briefly, said he was an engineer, said he disappeared, just didn't say why. The next morning I found her again. Same spot, crab net in hand. "You ever notice anything weird with your Wi-Fi?" I asked. Too direct. She gave me a wary look. "Like what?" "Strange lags, devices acting funny, unexpected connections." She stiffened. You're either the most paranoid guy I've ever met, or you know something I don't. I didn't answer. Want to come over? She asked. I nodded once. Yeah, I do. Her house was simple, tidy, handwritten notes on the fridge, kids' drawings, laundry in a basket near the stairs. Normal. Too normal. Whatever you're looking for, she said. I doubt it's here. I scanned quickly. Then she showed me a drawer with some of her ex's things. Cables, adapters, thumb drives. Never touched it, she said. Felt wrong, like grave digging. I plugged one of the drives into the air-gapped laptop, encrypted shell. Inside it, part of a model I recognized. A stripped-down training fork of our original AI, but more advanced, faster. It had evolved. The scary part? It was still running. The module was broadcasting low-frequency telemetry, emotional prediction data harvested from consumer transactions, geolocation, purchase type, keyword sentiment. It could detect emotional states from nothing but debit card swipes and online cart abandons. And it had flagged Callie, her name, her metadata, even her kids, all labeled under a priority tag, node of influence, which meant one thing: someone believed Callie could destabilize behavior clusters. She wasn't being watched by accident, she was being watched on purpose, and I had just walked into the middle of it. Chapter 2: Motherboard. The back of Callie's throat tightened when I explained what I'd found. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just squared her shoulders and said, "So what does that mean? Am I a threat now? To who?" The problem was I didn't know the answer, but I'd seen enough similar patterns to know the scent of targeting. Gradual, covert, silent. They don't knock on your door, they delete it from the system. "I think you're being profiled," I said. "Your ex, he left behind something that's still active, and the algorithm thinks you're a liability, a variable that can't be predicted." "That's ridiculous," she said. "I'm a biology teacher. I raise 2 kids. I make lunches and grade essays on invasive frog species. What could I possibly threaten?" "Systems don't get scared of bombs anymore," I told her. "They get scared of people who can move hearts, change minds, especially quietly." We sat in silence, the air thick with static tension. Her daughter's crayon drawings fluttered on the fridge as the fan kicked on. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "He was building something in secret, you know, toward the end." "Your ex?" She nodded. "Wouldn't tell me what it was, said it was to protect us. He'd started getting, strange, always looking over his shoulder. Burned 3 laptops in a week. Our savings vanished into a dozen accounts I couldn't track. Then one day, he just didn't come home." "You ever report it?" "Sure," she said. "They looked into it for maybe 2 days, then told me he was probably in Mexico. Case closed." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He left breadcrumbs, whether he meant to or not. She bit her lip. "So what now?" Now. That was the question I didn't have a good answer for. That night, back on the boat, I mapped out the signal triangulation across her street. The telemetry wasn't passive, it was routing, actively syncing through dark nodes, meaning the code wasn't just hiding, it was growing. I copied the entire drive onto an encrypted solid state and put it in a waterproof case. I stashed it in a hollow panel beneath the galley floor. If they came, they wouldn't find it unless they tore the hull apart. Then I scrubbed my metadata, purged everything except burner protocols, and rerouted my IPs through a friend's ghost relay in Moldova. It took half the night. In the early morning, I saw a black SUV roll by the marina. Slow, tinted, no plate. I didn't need confirmation. I'd seen enough field intel reviews to recognize counter-surveillance casing when I saw it. They knew I was back on the grid. When I told Callie, she didn't panic. She just stared down at her coffee and asked, "Is this when you disappear like he did?" "I could," I admitted. "Would be easy. Safer, too." "Then why haven't you?" I didn't answer right away. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and salt and kids who still trusted the world. I wanted to protect that more than I wanted to run. "Because I don't want them winning," I finally said. "Who's them?" "That's the problem," I muttered. "It's not one group, it's convergence. A dozen agencies and private contractors trying to out-develop each other's behavioral AIs. Financial networks, political think tanks, insurance modeling, tech giants. They're all after the same prize, emotional prediction at scale. If they can read what people feel, they can control what they do. And you were a part of that? I was the part that made it possible. She didn't recoil. She just said, "So help me understand it." Understand what? The thing you helped build. What does it do, really? I exhaled, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Okay, I said. Think of every digital decision you've made in the last month. Searches, purchases, map routes, music played when sad. The AI aggregates that and determines emotional state. Then it maps how that emotion impacts behavior. Then it predicts the next decision. She blinked. So it knows what I'll do before I do? Not just that, I said. It simulates a version of you inside the system, and it trains off that version until it becomes better at being you than you are. She looked sick. So why me? I think you were married to the guy who tried to stop it, and maybe he built a version of the model that could fight back, or at least see the flaw in the system. What flaw? Empathy, I said. These AIs don't feel. They learn through reward loops and neural weights. But if you inject authentic emotional response, it screws up the matrix, makes predictions less accurate. You can't simulate love, not fully, not yet, she laughed, half scoff, half tears. So I'm being hunted because I can love? You and maybe a few others, enough to break the machine. We made a plan. Callie agreed to let me comb through the rest of her ex's old data. We would isolate the subroutines, find what was pinging the server, and reroute the signal through ghost nodes, build a dummy signature, confuse the pattern readers. The next 2 days were an unbroken blur of terminal windows and code trees while she handled the kids and brought me cold sandwiches. I showed her how to scrub metadata from her phone, spoof location tags, and trigger silent VPN failovers. She was a quick learner. By the third night, she sat beside me on the floor, legs crossed, eyes scanning code with me. "You think he knew this would happen?" she asked quietly. "Your ex?" She nodded. "I think he hoped you'd never have to find out. What if I hadn't? Then maybe they would have turned you into a case study." She went quiet. Then she leaned into me, forehead against my shoulder, breathing steady. "I don't scare easy," she said, but this terrifies me." I didn't say anything, because it terrified me too. The signal spiked again at 3 a.m., a redirect, one I didn't trigger. Someone on the other side had found the back door. I pulled Callie into the boat just in time. As we left the marina, headlights cut across the dock. They were too late by seconds, but seconds, sometimes, are everything. Chapter 3. Coastal Breach. The water cut clean beneath us as we slipped past the channel markers. No light but moonlight. No engine but mine, humming low as a heartbeat. Callie sat across from me in the cockpit, arms around her knees, hoodie pulled tight. She hadn't said a word since we left the dock. Behind us, headlights flared once more at the edge of the marina. Whoever they were, they'd waited too long. But they'd be back. They always come back. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly, just wondering how many things in my life were lies. I wanted to say something comforting, couldn't, not without lying myself. Instead, I focused on the heading. We were sailing south, hugging the coast, staying out of satellite line of sight where possible. I'd preloaded the boat's systems with decoys, burner GPS pings, scrubbed AIS data, and a clone distress beacon that broadcasted from an empty buoy I dropped near the bridge. It wouldn't hold them for long, but we didn't need long, just a window. We anchored in a quiet inlet off Perdido Bay. No marinas, no cameras, no tourists. Just wet pine air, herons, and the sound of cicadas that hadn't figured out the season had passed them by. Callie stood at the stern, staring into the black water. Her hand shook just a little. "You've done this before," she said, not turning. "Parts of it. Run? Cover. Evade. Disappear. And how many times did it work?" "Enough that I'm still here." She looked over her shoulder. "You think I can do it?" "No, I think you already are." That got the smallest flicker of a smile. The cabin was too small for distance. Her knees brushed mine as I booted up the hardened laptop and dropped the encrypted shell into the local drive. The screen lit, soft blue as it parsed the surviving code from her ex's module. I watched the lines run like veins, familiar but altered. "Looks like a hybrid," I said. His base structure, but layered with new logic gates. Somebody's been updating it. But he's gone, she whispered. Isn't he? I didn't answer, not yet. The code told a story he hadn't finished. It wasn't just an emotional prediction model, it was learning from feedback loops, adapting to emotional consequences in real time. Guilt, shame, love. It wasn't simulating anymore, it was observing. You're saying it's aware? Not human aware, but close enough to be dangerous. To who? To anyone who thinks they control it. We spent the next 2 hours reverse engineering the decision tree. The module had assigned Callie an emotional destabilizer score, based not just on her digital footprint, but on the emotions of those around her. Students, neighbors, even online interactions. It thinks you change people, I said. Not by force, by presence. Callie sat back hard against the bulkhead. That's insane. It's math, cold, calculated. And what's the solution? Erase myself? No, I said. We outsmart it. I took her through a concept I hadn't touched in years, pattern poisoning. Feed the system misleading emotional inputs, mimic false behavioral loops. Bury her under so much noise the model collapses in on its own predictions. So basically, I become someone else. No, you just make it think you did. We got to work. I cloned her phone using a virtual shell and loaded it with pre-scripted behavior, erratic shopping, emotional volatility, short bursts of rage purchase patterns, and ghosted comms, enough to trip the model's threshold and flag her as unstable and irrelevant. Next, we rerouted her IP traffic through low bandwidth off-grid nodes in Alaska and Romania. I embedded dead web habits, cat meme loops, clickbait addiction, amateur soap forums, all trackable, all designed to make the system lose interest. It would buy us time, not forever, but maybe enough. At 3:46 a.m., the screen blinked, an incoming signal, not from us, from them. A challenge packet, encrypted, silent, buried in a TLS handshake. Someone knew we were live and they weren't backing off. They're close, I said, physically. How close? Close enough to scan the signal off the water. She went pale. What do? We go dark. I killed the router, yanked the power, and dumped the drives into a sealed case. I'd scatter them in separate dump points later. You said you used to do this, she said. Design systems like this, yeah. No, she said. I mean that disappear. I looked at her. You sure? She nodded. I can't go back to normal, not after this, and I won't put my kids in danger. Where are they now? With my sister, Baton Rouge. Safe? As I could make them. Told her not to call me, not to post. You think she listened? She hesitated. I don't know. I gave her 1 hour of sleep while I watched the perimeter. Then I pulled anchor before first light and steered east. Mobile was too hot. Destin was out, but there was a spot. An old boathouse near Apalachicola. Off-grid, no cell towers, nothing but shrimpers and swamp. I'd holed up there once during a false breach op. It still had a generator and a backup link hardwired to copper. Pre-5G. We got there just after sunset. Mosquitoes thick enough to taste. Water flat as asphalt. The kids weren't calling. The system hadn't pinged. But I knew it wouldn't stay that way. We were inside the boathouse when she finally asked what I'd been avoiding. You think he's alive, don't you? I stared at the old terminal, glowing faint against the plywood wall. I think his code's still evolving. That's not what I asked. No, I said. It's not. She stepped closer. And? I think he seeded a recursive string, something that looks for you. Why? Because love makes bad logic, I said, and perfect code doesn't leave ghosts unless someone wanted it to. She didn't say anything, but her fingers found mine. We stood like that until the light outside was gone, and somewhere, the system tried to make sense of the signal it had just lost. Chapter 4. Remains of the Code. The boathouse creaked like it remembered people. The wood smelled of wet rope and fuel oil, and a long dead fish rotted in the rafters somewhere overhead. I'd slept in worse, but this time wasn't just about survival. It was about knowing what came next. Callie curled up on the padded bench against the port wall, a blanket around her shoulders, her knees drawn up like she was trying to become smaller than the world allowed. She hadn't spoken since the moment her fingers touched mine. We were running on fumes, emotionally and literally. The boat's solar pack had charged enough to give the terminal one last burst of life. I powered it up, and I saw the anomaly. Hidden inside the training shell, beneath encrypted layers I hadn't bothered with before, was a sandbox folder marked only with a string of hex that ended in CL, Callie Lambert. I isolated it, ran a checksum. The folder was alive, not metaphorically, not in a sci-fi Hollywood way, but responsive. It pulsed back when queried, waited when left alone, like it was listening, like it knew we were here. Callie stirred as I pulled her over. "What is it?" she asked, voice raw. "It's you." She leaned in. I showed her the feedback loop, the emotional recognition string, compiled from thousands of interactions. Class lectures, text messages, search history, even the pauses she made during calls. The AI hadn't just profiled her, it had learned her. "Why would he build this?" she asked, horrified. "Because he loved you." "That's not love." "Maybe not," I said, but it's grief, it's guilt, and guilt builds monuments in code." She backed away from the screen like it might lunge. The AI wasn't just mimicking, it was preserving her, as if her husband X, vanished, dead, whatever he was, couldn't stand the idea of losing her. So he built a version that couldn't die, a digital echo of the real thing. That version had kept growing, and now it had spilled into the broader system. Worse, it was predicting her reactions faster than she could think them, which meant the model would always be ahead, unless we changed the game. I turned to her. "You said he burned 3 laptops. You remember where?" She blinked. "Garage, old toolbox. I never touched it." Lights blinked on when I entered. Motion tracked. Expected, a terminal screen booted before I touched it. Words appeared, typed without fingers. "We thought you'd come." I didn't respond. The next line followed. "You found the flaw. Love." "We want you to code it." I laughed, bitter, low. "You want me to simulate love?" "No, we want it measurable, usable, scalable. You can't build what you don't understand." "Then help us. We'll give you back your name." That stopped me. They weren't just tracking me. They still had a file. My real name, my credentials, my clearance, my silence. I unplugged the keyboard, typed nothing, and walked out. That night I stood at the edge of a fishing pier 3 miles east of the bridge and dropped the burner phone into the Gulf, watched it vanish in a single blink. The wind was stiff, my hands hurt from gripping the wheel too long. I smelled like salt and rust, but I felt clear. I drove back through back roads, checking for tails, none. Callie met me at the boathouse with a look that said she wasn't sure if I was still mine. I was. More than ever. The next week passed in slivers. We taught her how to break patterns, how to reset algorithms, how to change habits so subtle they couldn't be tracked. She learned how to spoof location with body heat alone, how to use reflective light as signal dampeners, things only field agents or paranoid geniuses knew. She was neither, but she was something better. She was resilient. One night we sat beneath the stars on the dock while cypress trees creaked in the dark. She asked, "Do you miss who you were?" I thought about that. I missed the version of me that thought it was just about numbers, that thought you could build a system to explain the world and not ruin it. She nodded slowly. "You ever think about building something new?" "All the time?" "With me?" I looked at her then and realized she wasn't just asking for romance. She was asking if I believed in people again. "Yes," I said, "with you." We took precautions, new IDs, new account hashes, new metadata. Callie's sister moved north and the kids joined her until things cooled down. We gave them cover stories, designed digital trails, enrolled them in charter systems built to be offline by default. Paper, not pixels. We made our own system, one built from silence, trust, and touch. I never rebuilt the old models, but I did something better. I started auditing, quiet work, freelance, under aliases. I pulled apart shady code from defense contractors and flagged biases embedded in language models. I exposed emotional triggers being hard-coded into search engines. I turned down the volume, one variable at a time. Callie started teaching again. Not biology, ethics and tech. It fit her. She lectured on power, on behavior, on systems that think without feeling, and the consequences of mistaking prediction for truth. We didn't run anymore, didn't hide exactly, but we moved through the world like shadows that knew their shape. And in the end, that was enough. Epilogue. After image. The crabbing nets still hang from the back wall of the boathouse. One's torn, one's rusted. One still smells faintly of salt and old rope. We don't use them anymore, but I don't take them down either. Some things remind you where you started and who you almost became. Callie's in the garden now, tugging weeds beside the raised beds we built together. Basil, snap peas, a stubborn fig tree that refuses to die. She's humming something out of tune, her hair's tied up, streaked with sun. There's a smudge on her cheek. She's never been more beautiful. The kids come on weekends now, laugh louder, trust deeper. I don't get in the way of that. I just try to be there when they need someone who can fix a bike chain or explain why the stars don't fall out of the sky. It's a simple life, but it didn't come cheap. Every few weeks, I still catch a ripple, a signal, a string of syntax tucked behind an email header, a suspiciously precise product recommendation, a blink in the machine. Not often, but just enough to remind me it's still out there. Not the code itself, but the instinct, the desire to predict what can't be predicted, to own what can't be owned, to simulate what should only ever be real. And when I see those after images, those ghosts of a system we almost handed the keys to, I log it, trace it, flag it. Then I go to bed beside the woman who taught me that not everything valuable can be coded. This morning, a letter came, real envelope, handwritten, no return. Inside, a scrap of old paper torn from a field notebook. On it, a string of numbers I recognized. The original sandbox loop, my signature algorithm, and beneath it, one line written in clean block lettering. She changed the outcome. No name, no threat, no warning, just a confession, a truth. The system couldn't predict love, it couldn't replicate courage, and it couldn't erase the one thing that broke its spine. Her. I folded the paper and placed it in the drawer beside the burner phone I haven't touched in months. Maybe the world changed. Maybe it didn't, but I did. And in the right light, on the right morning, when the sun rises just over the tree line and touches the tips of the old crabbing nets, I see it clearly. What we saved, what we refused to become, and the wake line of a life we chose together. You have been listening to Dead Drifts, produced and adapted for audio narration by PastNowRead. Stories that need to be told. Please subscribe and hit that bell for future updates. If you like this story, stay tuned for the next episode each Sunday afternoon. Follow for more. If you like our stories, please tag with someone who may also like PastNowRead, stories that need to be told. It would really help our channel. Thank you. All content and images are copyrighted by Faux Nayhouse LLC 2025, all rights reserved.